Hello, everybody. My name is Tomáš Etzlera, and I welcome you to another debate of Melting Pot today, a very important debate, My guest is Jimem Manahan. James is a fireman, a member of the New York Fire Department force for 36 years. He's retired now, and he is in today's debate because today we are commemorating one of the saddest days in American or even the world history. Today is September 11th, 2021, and 20 years ago, the largest scale terrorist attack ever in history happened on the United States and in New York and in other places, and James was there. Jim, thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
Jim, tell me, before we go to that horrible day, tell me, how did you become a fireman? What brought you to be a fireman?
Well, my father was a firefighter in New York City for 33 years. And so I followed him in his footsteps. And it's a very traditional occupation where sons and daughters now follow their parents in the department.
So was it difficult to join in?
Yes, it's not easy. They're given an exam every 4 years, written exam, and then a physical exam after that. And there was 30,000 people who signed up for the exam the year that I took it. And you ranked according to your grades. And during the 4 years, they hire about 2,000 to 2,500 people out of the 30,000 people who took the exam. So it's very competitive.
And how difficult when you join in, and how difficult is the training of the fire department in New York, and how often it has to be renewed, and how do you prepare?
Well, when I started in 1978, we have a large fire academy that lasted 6 weeks before they released you to your first firehouse for an assignment. But over the years, it has changed with time. Hazardous materials became important. Terrorist response became important. Building code laws are very important. So now currently, I believe it's about a 14-week program, up from the original 6 weeks when I first took it.
On Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, you've been with fire department for 23 years, if I counted correctly. But I cannot imagine then that anything could prepare you, any training could prepare you for what happened that day. Tell us a little bit about that day. Tell us, were you in the at work since the morning, or tell us a little bit how you remember that day.
I was in the middle of a 24-hour shift, which generally would start at 1800. And then it would go to the following 1800, but the traditional shifts would change at 0900. So I just finished work in the night tour, and I was a battalion chief in the borough of Queens. And we're getting ready for the coming day. And so there's around 8 o'clock, the incoming people start coming in. Some people continue on. And there's an exchange of information between firefighters and fire officers. And when the plane struck, it was before the start of the morning tour. And we heard the announcement over our voice alarm system that a fifth alarm was transmitted for the World Trade Center. And then at that time, we would all put on switch our radios from the Queens frequency to the Manhattan frequency to hear what was happening. And then we also turned on the news, which was now broadcasting it. And we just sitting there in shock to see what happened.
Tell me, when did it hit you that this is not an ordinary accident? And the reason why I'm asking is I just want to tell, that morning I was in the newsroom of CNN in Atlanta. And every morning at 9 o'clock, there is this huge meeting of all the editors, and all the management. And shortly after 9, I just saw them all running down the stairs. And I was also after a night shift, I was about to leave for home, and my boss came to me and she asked me, Tomáš, there was a Cessna, a small plane, just hit one of the towers in New York. Can you stay a little bit longer? So we all thought it's a Cessna. And so I was wondering, so when did it hit you? It was no ordinary accident.
Actually, it's interesting that you said that, because the first rumors were it was a small plane, even in for where we were standing. But once you saw it on what was going on, you knew it was not a small plane just by the amount of damage. And at that time, you still thought it was an accident. I was glued to the television watching the events, and as I was watching, I saw another plane in the frame of the camera. And in my mind, I couldn't comprehend it. I just said to myself, what's that other plane doing there? It doesn't belong there. And then it struck the South Tower. And at that time, it made it obvious there was an attack going on.
You know, I saw the same image and in live on television, and when I saw it, I was thinking, how could they? My mind also could not comprehend it. I was thinking maybe these broadcasters, they maybe already recreated like some sort of computer rendering of that attack, you know, some sort of computer animation. It really took me quite a few long moments to realize what was happening.
That's exactly the same for me. First, I was like, why is a pilot flying into the same area where this is happening? And then again, a few minutes went by before you realized this was it.
You were a firefighter at that point. You were off duty, no, at this moment?
I was on duty, yes.
On duty. So tell me what was happening, what followed, you know, like...
Well, at this time, I was a battalion chief, so in Queens, which was, 5-6 miles from Manhattan. And we were, the department issued what we call a total recall of all off-duty members once the second plane struck. So with the total recall, it gets broadcasted, through the news, telephones. Every firefighter in New York City is to come into work. So at this point, part of you wants to respond to the World Trade Center. But since I was not in that area at that time, it was my job to coordinate the firefighters who were coming into my battalion, which I had 10 units under my command. So we had to start thinking about where we're going to stage all the firefighters, rotate them, get them into the city, and basically try to follow some sort of organization instead of everybody just getting in their cars and driving into Manhattan.
Tell me more about how they evolved. Did you eventually end up in Manhattan?
Yes, as people were coming into the firehouses in my battalion. We were waiting for orders to where we were going to muster them or stage them and try to get city buses at those locations to start ferrying the firefighters in. You couldn't bring every fire truck into Manhattan because you still had to cover the areas where you're responsible for. But around, I would say, noontime, I got a phone call from the Queens dispatcher. Each of the 5 boroughs in New York City, each borough has their own dispatching system that you can cross over to. So I got a phone call from the Queens dispatcher, and they told me they were sending me to a firehouse on the Queens side of the Midtown Manhattan Tunnel. And I was ordered to set up a staging area at that firehouse for incoming units to bring them into Manhattan. When I got there, there was no firefighters there. Things were changing all the time. They were signing units to go to that firehouse, and then they wound up going into Manhattan. And so about 1 o'clock, I called the dispatcher up and said, I'm the only one at the staging area. And they said, okay, hold on. And then they sent me to a firehouse in Manhattan on Houston Street on the west side of Manhattan, and asked me to call the Manhattan dispatcher when I got there. And when I got there, it wasn't that far from the Trade Center. You could see what was going on by just looking south. And Manhattan dispatcher said I was going to be the only operating battalion chief in the whole lower Manhattan area, and asked me to respond to any alarm that came in south of Canal Street with fire units that were covering the area. And I remember him saying, please, Chief, don't engage into the World Trade Center. We need supervision in all the areas in Lower Manhattan. So from that point on, for the next 36 hours, I responded to, it seemed like 100 responses, probably not that much, it just seemed like that. But anything outside that block where the World Trade Center complex was, it was my responsibility. So we did a lot of buildings adjacent to the Trade Center on the opposite streets for a lot of civilians who were stuck in elevators, in basements. A lot of office workers down there were petrified. So they were receiving a lot of phone calls to rescue people from the neighboring buildings.
You know, I want to also ask a kind of a personal question. You are a New Yorker. You must love that city. What was going on through your mind, you know, when you were watching this incredible, unspeakable atrocity, catastrophe? You know, one of the reasons I'm asking, I remember when I was in the newsroom in Atlanta in CNN, when I was going to the toilet, there was like a group of, you know, every single time there was several of my colleagues, male colleagues, crying. They really could not believe what they've just are witnessing and what they have to report on. How were you holding on? How was your unit holding on?
Well, I had to block out anything personal at this moment. I couldn't think about what was happening at the city. I had to think about what my responsibilities were, because I was familiar with Manhattan, working in Manhattan, because my previous rank as a captain, I worked in Manhattan. So I was used to it because it's a different operating procedure to like Queens or Brooklyn areas. So I had to concentrate, and we had a lot of units from outside of Manhattan working there now. So I was working with units from Brooklyn and the Bronx and Staten Island, which are units I wasn't familiar with, and they were not familiar with the area. So I had to concentrate on operating in that area with unfamiliar units to the area, unfamiliar units to me, and I was not familiar to them. So it was difficult, and I had to focus those firefighters in their responsibility, because everybody just wanted to go to the World Trade Center. So every time we had an operation, the firefighters were going, Chief, we got to get down there. And I said, no, we have to protect the rest of the city. We have all of Lower Manhattan we have to cover. So that was very difficult to keep people focused on their jobs.
Yep. You know, already mentioned it, you know, people are talking about, you know, about the Twin Tower attack and everything, but by that attack, you know, and especially after the towers collapsed, many other buildings in surroundings were affected and got on fire. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, what was happening after the collapse of the buildings, with the buildings surrounded with the city?
Yes, that was very, very strange. Like I said, I was operating all around that area, and every time I would be there, I would look for people that I knew, and I was trying to, you know, size up the situation. And some of the World Trade Center complex buildings were 5 stories to 7 stories, and then building 7 was 47 stories. But I remember seeing the 6, 7-story office buildings of the complex fully involved in fire. Every window had fire coming out of it. And I just remember looking at that saying, if that was the only thing happening today, that 7-story building fully occupied in fire, that would be the biggest fire of my life. And all it was looking at it and saying, it's nothing compared to what was going on. Tell me, please, what were you doing the following days after September 11? What you know, because I know that the engagement of firefighters was there for weeks. You know, tell me, what was your job in the following days and weeks, please? All right. So for that first 36 hours, I just stayed at that firehouse in coordinating responses. And then one of my fellow chiefs relieved me, and I went back to my original firehouse just to get some rest. You know, I've been up. Now it's way over 24 hours total. I mean, 48 hours. So I went back to my firehouse. I got about 6-7 hours rest, waited for further orders, and that's when they started setting up a rotation system within the first 48 hours. And the rotation system was pretty easy at that time. It was 24 hours you were assigned to the World Trade Center, and then the next 24 hours you were assigned to your firehouse. Then you went back to the Trade Center. And this lasted, I believe, a week to two, until the rotation system became 24 hours at the Trade Center, another 24 hours at your firehouse, and then you went home for 24 hours to rest. And unfortunately, that 24 hours that you went home to rest, at this time, that's when the funerals of the firefighters who died was starting. So you would get home, you would shower, put on a uniform, go to a local funeral in the area that you lived. I lived in the suburbs, where a lot of firefighters do live. You went to that funeral, you went home, you went to sleep, and then you started the cycle all over again.
But tell me, what are you looking for? Survivors? Was there still
Yes.
fires were there still fires to extinguish? What was the role your unit and you were playing when you were assigned to the World Trade Center?
So as a battalion chief, I would be giving anywhere from 5 to 10 units to supervise. And each time you went down there, like every third day, you would have a different assignment, but it was basically extinguish the surrounding fires, searching for victims, which within a week, searching for victims changed to searching for people who died. It goes to a recovery effort at that time. And so there might be one 24-hour period. I'd be supervising units looking to recover victims. Another time I would be down there supervising the fire hoses, extinguishing the fires. And when the buildings did collapse, those buildings, we refer to it as the pile at first until the workers removed a lot of the rubble, and then it became known as the pit. But it burned for months and months because of the compression of the collapse. It was just deep-seated, and you just had to keep on putting water on it. And then the recovery effort was a long time, because every time they would bring in the heavy equipment, you would find like small voids, and you were able to find victim, whether they were members of service, police or fire, or civilians. And it was hard work for the firefighters doing that. It was emotional, especially when you found a firefighter or a police officer, which you could tell by the uniforms. And but the firefighters did a great job recovering as many victims as they could.
Looking back at those 20 years, how do you look at those days and months or weeks and months following that attack, that atrocity? Tell me, how did it change you?
It changed your life.
In what
For
manner?
22 years, I was used to going in, working my 24-hour shift. I was trained. I had a lot of experience. I was comfortable in my position. And now, after this happens, I'm no longer comfortable in my position because it's a new world, and new training had to take place, which we knew would be coming. And the way you looked at things was different. One of the biggest things I would say for most firefighters after that was, when you left for work, you gave your children, your spouse, your partners an extra hug, because now it was like, sure, we would have firefighter deaths over the years since I've been on the job, but at a magnitude like this, it really brought home how fragile life is.
If I may ask you, did any of either you or any of your firefighters in your unit had to receive some sort of special health treatment after witnessing this catastrophe of this magnitude?
Yes, I think just about everybody sought some sort of help, whether it was individually with a private therapist, but the New York City Fire Department offered extensive amount of therapy for years, and it's still actually taking place 20 years later. They still have a unit assigned to talk to people, and they would send therapists to firehouses, like once a day if they needed it, twice a day, once every other day. So, and depending on where you worked, like most firehouses in Manhattan who lost a lot of people, they needed more therapy, but everybody needed some sort of therapy.
What did the tragedy told you about New York City? How the city reacted in general, not just the fire departments, and how did the city change since then?
It was like, I'm a student of history, and one of the things that we could compare it to is the attack of Pearl Harbor in 1941, where the country came together and put their petty differences together away and came together for a common cause. And that's exactly what happened in New York City and the rest of the country. Every city worker, from sanitation workers to office workers, pitched in. The construction workers, couldn't say enough about the private construction workers who came in and risked their lives and their health, their future health, by coming in and cutting those steel beams and removing the rubble. The donations that were coming in from the private industry, while a lot of donations, and this is a common problem with donations, a lot just get stored in a storehouse. There's donations that people really do need, so it has to be filtered. And the state government was fantastic. And I have to say the federal response was amazing. And it really helped us. And in the future, in our training that we made so many friends that it really helped us, years later to develop a response to these type of incidences.
This is another question I have is, how did it change the fire department? Because this was an event never, ever, unprecedented before. Yeah. And how did it change the training? How did it change the preparations of the firefighters? And yes, please, if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. There's a few different aspects of what went on. They had a very intense review of the response in the aftermath. So nothing changed right away. We waited for the review of what went right, what went wrong, and what we could do. And so we took a lot of those recommendations. Luckily, we had a lot of funding to change the department. We had a lot of federal money coming in, because as everybody knows, you could have a recommendation, but if you can't fund it, it doesn't work. So a couple of things happened. We have a Marine Bureau. There's Manhattan is an island, and there's a lot of waterways, and all our fireboats were old, from the 1950s, 1960s, and the response of those boats were very slow. So one of the recommendations was to modernize the fleet, which we did need because the fire hydrant system in Lower Manhattan went out when the towers collapsed. So we had to use fireboats to stretch hose lines across Manhattan to get water. So over the years, they modernized the Marine Bureau with fast boats, bigger boats, more capability of pumping water, and a tremendous fleet that we have now. We also developed a new bureau for counterterrorism that we assigned a high-ranking chief to, with a staff that would work with the feds in the state and the local law enforcement to keep us aware of possible terrorist attacks and type of training that we should take. Our fire academy changed to add terrorist events to our training, whether it was brand new recruits, how to train them, or we would bring units into the fire academy to develop training techniques, like for a bus bomb or a car bomb or a large scale. And then one of the recommendations which I got involved with was we were the biggest fire department in New York, in the country. Chicago was like number 2, but we did have the biggest fire department, and we never ran out of resources. We have so much resources there, but we ran out of resources. Supply chains went out. We couldn't plan for the future because it's such a big event. So one of the biggest things that helped us the day or two after 9/11 is the federal government sent in what's called an incident management team. And those are the people situated out throughout the United States that coordinate the wildland fires that you see on TV, that you also have in Europe, that cover, 10, 20, 30 kilometers in size and even bigger. And they developed a technique in the 1970s called the incident command system that helped where you would have multiple fire departments and agencies respond to an event. And a team of individuals would run these events 24/7. And they showed up down at the World Trade Center on the day or two afterwards. And at first, we didn't know how to use them. They were from the U.S. Forest Service. But once they incorporated into us, we found out, wow, they could supply a radio antenna on top of the Empire State Building for our radios in 24 hours. Because that's how they have to do it in the mountainous areas. So one of the recommendations was New York City Fire Department should develop an incident management team on their own. And we signed an agreement with the Forest Service where they trained us extensively. Where next thing you know, I'm in Montana at a forest fire and developing these techniques of managing these large incidences. And we kept the training up. We recruited more people. And to the point where when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana in 2005, our team was deployed to assist the New Orleans Fire Department in a large-scale incident. And from there, we just started developing our techniques more, following the national system. And we've been deployed throughout the country extensively for like hurricane relief. We have a team out there right now in Montana running their own forest fires. And so that also helped us in events in New York City that when we got hit with Hurricane Sandy, the team was deployed for planning and logistical reasons for 60 days. And it just makes things so much smoother.
You covered, or were deployed to some of the largest tragedies, mostly natural tragedies in the history of the United States, in the modern history of the United States. Tell me, did you ever have any regrets that you chose this profession? Did you have any regrets that you could have been baker to have an easier life?
No, I never had a regret. We always have an expression. I never had a bad day at work except for one, and that was at 9/11. And even after 9/11, to be able to read one of the my most biggest achievement, I think, of myself is that luckily at the time I wasn't hurt, but I was able to stay with the department. I got promoted a few more times after 9/11 to where I was in a position to help rebuild the fire department and incorporate these changes to make the department better. And I remember when I first started, a senior firefighter always told me that he goes, when you're in the fire department, when you retire, you want to make the department a little bit better than it was when you started. And so when I retired after almost 36 years, I was able to say that to myself. I was there and I was able to make it a little bit better.
Jim, I congratulate you on that. And with that, I would say thank you. Thank you very much for your time and for these incredible memories and experiences of yours you were sharing with us. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was an honor to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I thank you to all our viewers for joining us for this amazing debate. And I will see you someday in the future. Thank you and have a good evening now.